So hello and welcome to part 2 of XAMN Turn the Dials to 10. Hopefully everybody can hear me this time. Appears that we're working. So let us have a look at what we covered in the first part and go over a quick recap from part 1. Good afternoon, everybody, and good morning and good late evening to people. So we're welcome back to part 2. Like I say, 2 weeks ago that we covered part 1, where we went through preparation and we sort of explained the importance of why it's key to prepare for any investigation. So quick details about myself. So I'm Adam Furman, Tech Evangelist here at MSAB. I won't go into the full details of myself, but feel free to go back to part 1 where you can find out about myself, or connect with me on LinkedIn for a more detailed view of what I get up to for MSAB. So like I said, we'll start off with a quick recap from part 1. It's been 2 weeks ago, and if your memory's like mine, you will have forgot a few details from that. But let's have a look. So I mentioned how we need to be prepared. Preparation is key to any successful investigation. If we're in law enforcement, private industry, military, everything that we do, preparation leads to success. The more you can prepare for something, the better advanced and equipped you'll be to deal with your findings. But we also need to understand what our tool is doing. And we need to remove ourselves from being a push button operator and actually understanding what our tool is doing when we press get evidence. And how do we deal with what our tool does not pass? We need to be equipped with that so we can deal with apps that aren't supported by the main vendor tools. But also having the ability to understand what the tool has done and how to pass data puts you in a far better position to go and answer those queries. If you're ever called to give evidence or testimony, for example, you're going to be able to stand there with better confidence. And we also spoke about how reporting is the end product of your case. And you can find the best evidence in the world, but if your reporting lets you down, you could fall over at that last hurdle. I also spoke about my favorite subject, and that is validation. So in order to validate, we need to have confidence in our findings. Like I just explained, in order to give testimony, you need to know your case inside and out, and you need to be able to verify your tool's findings. All of these things allows you to be better equipped when you're trying to understand what your tool's doing, and then you're better equipped to present that evidence. I've also put a quick link up to the SANS Institute with 6 steps to successful mobile validation. This was done with a lot of people within the industry who came up with some accepted terms. And those terms, for example, as we can see, are determine all possible extraction methods for your search authority. So this is what I covered. Is your tool set up for what you're looking to achieve? There's no point turning all of the dials on if it's not needed, and your tool might not support the device you're after. So you need to evaluate and work out what is the best tool for a job, which is what we would do in everyday life. And the second step, if you've only got one tool, we highly recommend that you need multiple tools. Process the data in different tools, see the different findings. And I'm aware from my law enforcement days with different products, they may call things different. They may call an artifact something completely different. So it is hard to compare sometimes, but you should be able to do it and understand what each tool is doing. And like I've keep going on about deep dive forensics, we need to stop this push button forensics. There is a need for it. Of course there is. We need to deal with the volume of cases that are coming through. But as a forensic examiner, you need to understand what your tool is doing. And that, in my opinion, is where the forensic examination begins. And validation for a variety of reasons. It could be a visual validation. You may manually check the handset after you've extracted it to verify what your tool has extracted is correct and present. Verify it with call data records. We may sometimes need to prove provenance of a device, for example. We can do that by doing a subscriber check. You could also look for CCTV inquiries. These may reinforce the location data that you've extracted from the mobile device. And you may need to do some deep carving But again, as long as you've documented those processes and explained and understand what happens, then you're in a good position to present that as evidence. And replication. Remember, everything in mobile forensics or in digital forensics overall, it has to be able to be replicated. So for this, we need to keep a written log of what we've done, what tools we've used, what version, so the process can be replicated. And then, like I covered off in the last slide, the final part is the reporting and sharing your findings. If you've dealt with a very niche application, write a blog post about it and share those details, and we all prosper as a community. But the reporting is where your whole case can fall apart. And the last point at the bottom there is education. We all need to be educated within this industry. You can go on a tool or vendor neutral training, for example, and 12 months later, things have changed, things have advanced. So bosses within organizations need to understand that staff need continued investment for their development. And you'll be able to get a link to the validation paper there, as you can see on the bottom of the screen. So what happens with where is my data? We quickly covered this. You need to know your tool's superpowers. You need to know how to go deep diving, and you need to validate your findings with other tools. My biggest sort of promotion within this webinar is to create test data. Test data allows you to find and replicate data artifacts. And if you've created it, you're going to know what to look for, which makes your validation far easier. So if you've got a case and you're unsure of how an app is working, replicate it, create that test data, and then test it and test. And that way you'll be able to have the most confidence when you're presenting that evidence. And I've just covered this point about sharing your findings. We as a community prosper from this shared research, and don't allow your peers to spend the same time investigating that niche app that you've invested in. We all prosper as a community. But like I said, it was just a quick recap. So what we'll do now is I'll turn my camera off so we can have full screen for XAMN, and we're going to return to our investigation. So what I want to do first is I want to bring up how we started our investigation. And that is, we were looking at a digital strategy. So we were working out a strategy of who the suspect was, the offence for which they were arrested for, who the investigating officer was, the exhibit submitted, along with the serial number, exhibit reference. Are there any linked co-defendants? And also, what points are we looking to establish? And with all of those points, it should allow you to create a digital forensic strategy. And the text that I've put in here just sort of reiterates that using those details above, and by all means, use this as a baseline, but you're going to want to add on it, because by gaining these details, it should allow you to set scope for the work you're carrying out. And it isn't feasible to review every artifact, but by getting this detail up front, it's going to allow you to be focused on the points to prove for your case. And then we've got some details down here with some keywords that I came together, a date and time range, the offence that we're looking to prove, along with what tools that I chose for my extraction, again linking in with that SANS validation, and what processing options did I turn on. I showed them in part one how our extraction tools should have capabilities to turn different functionality on and off. So with that, we can set a review strategy. And I would say that the first part of my review strategy is always going to be device provenance. And why is that important? It's important because if you can't establish device provenance, you could run the best investigation in the world. But if you can't put your suspect or subject on that device, then your investigation is flawed. So to me, device provenance is always my first point of call. And you can see here on the left-hand side, and the timing has worked perfectly. Locally here in the UK, it's 4:10. For those outside in North America, 16 is 4 o'clock. So we start with our investigation. And I will start with my investigation log indicating that I have just carried out my review strategy. And what I would have to do is I would have to exhibit my review strategy, because it could become evidence. Yes, it may not be disclosable because it could involve police techniques, for example, but I still have to exhibit it. And that's what I would do. So as we carry on, we would then indicate that we opened the extraction in XAMN and what version. So we have XAMN. Let me just bring it onto the main screen. So we have XAMN, and you will notice here we're running version 7.10. 7.10 has come out today for those of eagle-eyed amongst of you. And if you pop over to the handouts, you will see that there is a new in Q2 24 release PDF where you're going to be able to see all of the details, what's new in XAMN and XRY and Exec Director. But I've also popped in the handouts the XAMN release notes if you wanted those for this version of 7.10, along with some training details and some XAMN features. There is also a few polls that are floating around, and this just helps us understand how we can potentially deliver training in the future to you guys. So let's move on with our investigation. So the first part we're going to want to do is clearly open our case. And as we go to our folder, we go to our case file. Now remember, working in a case file in XAMN opens every extraction that's within this folder. So we double click it. And if you've got any questions as we're going along, please feel free to put it in the Q&A or the chat. It is me here on my lonesome monitoring, so just bear with me, give me time, but I will get to your questions and we'll try and go through them live as we're working the case. So we start off with device provenance. This is the #1 priority when we're starting a case. We need to prove who this device belongs to. And you will notice when we go to the middle, XAMN very cleverly identifies this as belonging to Ronnie. And if we go back to our strategy, we can see that our suspect is indeed Ronnie or Ronald Reeves. So it's quite handy that XAMN has done that for us. But again, like I have said, always validate this data. So there's a couple of ways we can do this. We could, of course, go into all artifacts. And we can simply pop along to device accounts, which is an artifact category down here. Now, of course, we could have got to that from the main front page. We could have got to that from the case tab, as we can be seen here. If we open up show subcategories, we can go in and get the device details that way. But if we go to device account, you will see we have one custom picture. Well, it's not a custom, it's a stock picture, because the user has identified themselves as XAMN XRY. And you may not always get a nice case that someone calls themselves by their name. So this is something to bear in mind. And you may be thinking, well, how has XAMN identified that this is Ronnie? And it's done that via different means, by looking at messaging apps, what the person is saved in contacts. And XAMN has identified that for you. But you want to be able to understand who XAMN XRY is. And like I said at the start, when we were looking through the slides, you would also want to do a subscriber check. That would be one of the first things that I would be doing on the telephone number that was identified in the handset. If you've got a subscriber check that can come back and say this person is registered with a T-Mobile account and it's paid out of their bank account, then provenance is beyond doubt. So where can we go to look for account information? So there's a couple of places, and one thing that you'll probably want to visit is SANS have put together a very, very handy poster. And if you just Google SANS FOR, so that's Foxtrot Oscar Romeo 585, and you look for their cheat sheet, it has a link to all of Android and iOS artifact locations. But some of these you will start to learn off the top of your head. So how I would do it is I would clear my filter, because at the moment I'm looking at device accounts. So I clear this funnel, and it's going to return all artifacts back to me. Because remember, we're not, yes, we've got dates and times and keywords to run, but at the moment we're trying to prove device provenance. So then what we can do is we can go down and have a look at the user data folder. So you can see here on the device ID that it's come out with user ID 0. So on the Android file system, this account is user ID 0. So if we switch to file tree and we start navigating through the Android file system, you can see as we go into user data, one of the places that I like to go is down to system. And as we wait for that folder to open, we're going to then want to open users. And we know that our user ID was 0 because it's telling us here. So if we go into 0 and I look at photo, I have got the same photo. So this is the stock image for this Android account. And because the person has identified themselves as XAMN XRY, it's clearly created an X. But if they'd got a custom picture, this is where that picture would be sitting. And this is where XAMN has got that information from. And within this folder, you can see that we've got various files such as settings config, which is going to tell you about some of the installed applications and other useful artifacts. And you may want to look at this folder for every case going forward. And what you could do is create a quick view to do that. And we will cover that as more as we go through. So let's navigate further back through the file system. And if we go to System CE, User 0, and there's a database here called accounts_CE. And if we go, and what I'm going to do is rather than look at the SQL table in this tiny little details box, if I go to the free Swedish meatballs, I can show in a new tab, or I could launch it in an open source database viewing tool if I want to. And we may do that later on. So I'm going to show it in a new tab. And the first table I'm going to want to look at is accounts. And you can see here we've got some accounts. So we've got a WhatsApp account, Facebook, Signal, and a secondary Facebook. And you can see here that the name associated with this device is examinxry@gmail.com. So that's potentially another subscriber check that you could carry out. And we're not always going to be able to find that a person has named their device Ronnie Reeves. So this is just to be mindful of. These are the sort of places that you need to be hunting. Another very good place that I normally look is when I come up to data is com.android.vending. This file location is full of gems. So as we scroll down, you can see here we've got the com.android.vending. And as we open that folder up, and this is the gold mine. So this folder here with databases, you can see here that there is a ton of interesting artifacts that are going to be able to help you. And this is where XAMN is passing a lot of the data from that you're seeing. So we've got things such as data usage. So you can check on what data is being used on a device, Wi-Fi, install, which is also going to show you apps that have been installed. And we'll come back and we'll look at that later on. But another place that I also like to show, and whilst we're coming here, and normally what I would do is I would create a screenshot of every artifact that I'm using. So for example, we used earlier the system database. So let me quickly go down and show you how I would do it. So we went down to system CE, and then we went on to account CE. then we opened it in a new tab. And I would show this just to show that that is what is shown on within that database. And I would take a nice screenshot, and you can of course use it from XAMN. Or you can use a snipping tool. It's entirely up to how you want to run it. And I've got an XAMN window somewhere. It's because I'm sharing multiple screens. So for the purpose of this, what we'll do is we'll just use Windows built-in snipping tool. And you can see here, I'm going to grab part of my case details. And then in snipping tool, I'll be able to use the functionality built in. So I could then highlight what I'm trying to show. But then, of course, what I can do is just copy that, and then I can place that into my event log. So with the time, so we're now at 16:21 in the UK. And what you can see I'm doing here is I'm leaving myself little breadcrumbs. So if I was to suddenly go off sick or something was to happen to me, a colleague in my department is going to know why I was doing what I was doing, and they're going to be able to follow along with my methodology. I want whoever's reviewing this case to be able to see it through my eyes. And the more detail I put in this log, the better for anyone who comes along after me. So as we move back to XAMN, we've shown that the account is just XAMN XRY. So now we can move on to a different stage. And of course, if I wanted to, I could tag that as evidence. And what we'll do is we'll come up and we'll create a new tag. So we'll come up to here, click new, and we'll leave it as green, and we'll call it, so human trafficking evidence. And of course, you could add multiple tags here. So you could have one for provenance, you could have one for evidence of points to prove. And I'm going to extend my tag into child artifacts. So we've now got that tag. And you have to bear with my machine. It's baking here in the UK. I'm in a stuffy office with the window closed, so you guys don't get the background noise. So it's probably struggling like I am. But here we go. So we've now got our new tag to use. So we right click, choose tag, and this is going to be my human trafficking evidence. And now if I check the left-hand pane, I can see that I've now got a number 1 next to my newly created tag. So that's great. I can refer to that as we go on. The next artifact that I always show, and it's probably not so important for people working in the UK, but for people working in areas of multiple time zones, you need to establish what time zone and maybe what language the device was originally set to. And there's a lovely little file that you can use for that. So let's pop along and find that file. And the file you're going to want is persistent_properties. And we can get that from the user data folder. So user data, and then we want to look for a folder called property. And it's this XML file here. And again, as we go through, we can see the local language is set to GB. So Great Britain, this is my test device, so it's as expected. And as we scroll down, you can see that the persistent time zone is set as Europe and London. So again, this is probably going to be a file that I want to include in my case. Now, of course, I could do another screenshot. So we'll do a new one here. I could, of course, save the file out separately if I wanted to, but I'm just going to copy this. And as we go back, so we record a new time. So time zone set to Europe, London. And we can say device is set to GB. So again, these are more and more evidential files that we're finding to help produce provenance. And again, I'm going to right click, choose my tag, and that is human trafficking evidence. So now if we go back to what we covered in part one, and in part one, we spoke about legal privilege and how do we deal with it when we're running an investigation. And I had a good follow-up question that came into me about different ways of automating that process going forward. And if you remember, we can come out of this now, all categories. We set up a quick view for legal privilege. So if we now run that legal privilege, this is, remember, it's going to run a word list, and I've rewatched the recording and none of you picked me up on spelling lawyer wrong, but I've corrected it for this episode. So running that keyword list has produced 2 artifacts. Now we can instantly look at these and know that they're not going to be legal privilege, but for the purposes of demonstration, we've now got a word list with 2, and this is the quick view that's in place. So how can we review everything else within this case? Obviously, if it was the officer in charge, they should not be looking at legal privilege. As a forensic examiner, you may be third party to this investigation, so you, of course, could look at it. But if you wanted to exclude it, there's several ways. We could, of course, tag it as legal privilege. So let's go up to our tags. Let's create a new one. And we'll change the color on this one, and we'll go that color. That's quite nice. So we'll call it legal privilege. We'll extend it to tag and to child artifacts. We'll hit save. And again, just remember, guys, if you've got any questions, just throw them in the chat or the Q&A, and I will do my best to monitor both screens. So we've now got our legal privilege, and of course we can choose to tag with legal privilege. So they are now tagged as legal privilege. And if I now clear my filters, I could invoke it again by going to my tagged filter. So we just had a good question, and it's about write-ahead log files for database files. And I will come back to you when we start to look at unsupported apps. So I will not forget you, promise. So, but what we're currently reviewing is how do we exclude this from our view? Now, what you can do is on your word list, because remember, this is a quick view. We just invoke this quick view. What you can do is if you go to the free Swedish meatballs, as well as have it as a filter, you can have it as an exclude filter. So once I activate it as exclude, it's going to return everything in this case apart from those 2 files. And the total number in this case before this was 121811. And what I'll do is I will go back to my case. We will press all artifacts. So we're now going to open up a second tab with all artifacts with no exclusion on. And there you go. You can see we're at 121811. And we've also got one with our exclude on, which is showing the 2 less items. Now, another way I could deal with this, I could come up to here to the floppy disk and create a portable case or a subset. And then I could create a portable case with those artifacts excluded. So that's one way of working with this. But remembering back to part 1, we created a quick view on having these hits included. We can also make a quick view to exclude them. So we're saving this filter set as is. So if we close both of those tabs, you'll see here is one I made earlier with LPP exclude. And if I click that, it's going to return the total artifact minus those 2 artifacts. As you can see by the number at the top. And you can see down the bottom here, here is the filter it's invoking. Quick views cannot be underestimated. You can create them for folder locations, file paths. So if you're wanting to look at first generation images, for example, set a file path, quick view, which all of these steps take time and preparation. But as we covered on part 1, preparation is going to help you succeed. It's impossible to look through all of these artifacts and make life easier for yourself. If you find that you're using persistent underscore properties every time, set up a quick view. That way you can just drill straight down to the relevant data. So another thing that we added for legal privilege, and I just wanted to show you guys, if you go through a conversation, for example, in WhatsApp, and you've got legal privilege, another way of dealing with it is by redaction. And XAMN has got built-in redaction capabilities. And you can create reports, and once you create a subset, that redaction cannot be removed. So it's a great way of just covering all bases. And it's really super simple to do. So if we go up to this one with Ronnie and Willie, and we'll go to one with text, which would probably be better. So we'll go to Ronnie with Mambat and say this part, say this was legal privilege. What I can do is if I highlight the text here, I can right click and I can redact. And I can redact just this artifact, or I can redact everything within this chat thread. And if I just redact this one artifact, you can now see it is blacked out. And I can come up and I can unredact. But if I save that as a subset, that option would not be there. So it's a great way of being able to share the majority of a message thread, but keeping that one legal privilege redacted. So we'll unredact that, and as we'll move on. So we've started our case. We've shown provenance of a device. So we've identified that the user ID was 0. We've identified, and remember, you're not always going to be able to find the device ownership. So you need to rely on other ways to validate your data, just like the SAN 6 steps showed. Back it up with call data records, subscriber checks. But I showed you some of the places that are likely going to contain the information where XAMN is passing that data from. But let's move on to our digital strategy. So if we go back to our digital strategy, and as I scroll down here, we start off with provenance. We can tick that off now. We've sorted out provenance. We found out that the account on that device belongs to XAMN XRY, and we can carry on looking at provenance as we're going through. And this is sort of provenance too, but I've left it in there just to cover sort of some of the points that we need to consider. But one of the main things for human trafficking is we want evidence of comms between the parties involved, including evidence that points towards or away, because remember, we're acting impartial from either person committing any of the detailed offences. So who are our likely suspects? We had Wayne Bruce, Will Money, Ray Jacku. Those are the guys, and Ronnie Reeves, our suspect. So let's return back to XAMN and let's have a look at what contacts are in the. So if I'm going to go straight down here into Android system contacts. And again, you'll notice I'm trying to stay away from the all artifacts. That is not an efficient way of investigating any case. And just for clarification, you remember last time we turned on our known data system files and app files, I've left them turned on. So that's instantly reduced noise. So here we go. We're going through the account name, XAMN XRY, and we're going through some of the contacts that have been saved. Now, obviously, this is a test device, so it hasn't got hundreds upon hundreds, but you get an idea of we can soon find the people who we're interested in. As we scroll down, we know that there were Will, Ray Jacku, and Wayne Bruce. And just like I showed you in part 1, when we went through the case page, I showed you this persons tab. Well, as we're working a case, you'll also remember that I told you that anything in blue is a hyperlink. It's not a hyperlink to open a new website, but it's a link to open a new tab. So if I now click on Mambat, you can see this person has now come up, and I can see we've got a display name, their name, telephone number associated with them, a WhatsApp ID, and a Google Duo ID. These are all identifiers that XAMN has automatically put linked to this person. And I can make that a person of interest. So as I do that, I can go through and I can do the same with Will Money. So if I click here, there's further details for Will. I want to make him a person of interest. Ray Jacku was another one. I want to make him a person of interest, or her, obviously. We press OK. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to close back out and I'm going to go to my Persons tab. And Persons, so if we come up to here and we look for Ronnie, you can see that XAMN has automatically joined identifiers to Ronnie. And if I open the window, you can see that they've identified that this is the telephone number belonging to this device. So this is the device that's making outgoing calls with this telephone number that XAMN will have worked out from the SIM. Because remember, in our data sources, if we look at the device, the extracted device, we're going to be able to see SIM information and the telephone number linked to that device. So as we scroll down, here is the telephone number linked to that device. And again, there's going to be artifact locations that allows you to verify and validate that finding. But let's return back to Persons. So XAMN has automatically identified that +44, that's a variant of 07, that's a UK calling code, is the same person. And as we scroll down, you can see it's joined the WhatsApp ID, it's joined the Signal, and it's helped us to build a profile for Ronnie. So of course, Ronnie is going to be a person of interest to my case. But you can see here, I've got Ronnie too. We've now got an email that links to him. Now we know that email is associated with the device because we saw it set up as a user account. But this isn't Ronnie 2, this is Ronnie. So what we can do is we can join these identifiers to our main account. So we'll go to join with person, and then we do a quick search for Ronnie. Hit OK. And I want to keep Ronnie. I don't want #2. I'll keep Ronnie. So now you can see Ronnie is starting to build up. We now have an email. So again, I'd want to snip that and have this as a nice piece of attributing evidence. But I want to continue working on Ronnie's profile. And you can see here, we've also got one Ronnie Reeves. So this is his Facebook ID. Again, it's Ronnie. So we're going to keep the original Ronnie. Go back here. Ronnie Reeves 2. And here is his Instagram ID. So these are the last identifiers to join. And then we're going to have a nice complete Ronnie. Keep Ronnie. And what I can do now is at the top here, I can list only persons of interest. So these are the people who were identified on my digital strategy. So we've got our suspect and we've got our 3 linked defendants. Great. As we return to XAMN, you can see that XAMN's also suggesting that this could be Ronnie. It automatically joins, but it also has other identifiers. But this is where Persons comes into, I missed the proof of life pop-ups, brighten them back. Yeah, I know. So this is where Persons comes into its own. And remember, everything blue, we know what it does now. So I want to show artifacts where Ronnie appears. So once I click that, it's going to open a new tab and it's going to apply a participant filter. And you can see down here on the bottom left, my 4 persons of interest have come up as options for me to include as a filter. And I know the proof of life pop-ups that you want to bring them back. I got a lot of feedback that people didn't like them, and I didn't even realize that they were left on as part of the system. So that's why they're off. But if you really want them back, I'll add them. But I think you're trying to wind me up. So as we carry on, you can see Ronnie, this is his phone. This is his device. We expect it to bring back the most artifacts. So we've got 582 artifacts. And this dodgy Ronnie has even been calling me. So what we can do is we can bring in all of these people and filter on all of their personas. And I could, of course, have spent further time enhancing Willie's profile, Man-Bats, and Ray Rayq's. But you can see we've now got a combined 615 artifacts to look for in relation to our crew we're investigating. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop straight to conversations. That's what we spoke about that we wanted to prove in order to help us prove human trafficking. So conversation view in the middle, these are our chat threads, and I always sort by count highest first. I want to sort the ones where the most chat is going on. And you can see it's clearly Ronnie has been liaising with Man-Bat quite a lot. I sort the chat thread by oldest first because this is how it would display on a person's handset. If I was to quickly produce a PDF of this chat thread because the officer had a person in custody, for example, this is the best way for that evidence to be fair for a lay person to understand. They'll look at that, they'll understand how their own device works, and they'll understand that it goes from oldest to newest. There are other options for us. We could, of course, sort by newest, and we could remove text and just look for attachments if this was a XAMN investigation, for example. But as we go through, we can scroll through and we can start to see some evidence of human trafficking. And so we think to ourselves, this is going to be a chat thread of relevance. We're now talking about, there's several attachments here. Reverse engineering, the meter, all these sort of cases we've seen in most human trafficking investigations. So this is the one I'm looking at. Now, of course, I could tag individual parts of that chat, but a great way of chat evidence in this whole thread is just to right click, tag artifacts, and I'm going to tag them as human trafficking evidence. And that then tags the entire conversation. And all of these tags that we're creating are going to be used in our part 3, which happens in 2 weeks' time on July 10th. And we're going to bring all of that together because, like I say, the reporting element is where your case could fall apart. So you can see now my tags are slowly starting to build. But we had other defendants with this case. So if we move to WhatsApp, we can see that there's a group, Master Crew, where they all appear to be present. And we can go up to here and we can see that there's four participants in total. The right-hand side is the owner, and the left-hand side is going to be the other participants. And as we go along here, we can see that details of the messages, we can see location data that's been shared, and you would go through the contents of the chat, and potentially you would also run the keyword list that we identified in our digital strategy. Running this keyword list would allow you to identify those chats quicker. But they may have an alias for some of those keywords. They may not always call it the perfect textbook words that we would be looking for. But as we scroll through, we can see we've got location data. Somebody's had a nice holiday to Aruba. But they've been human trafficking. They're sending us details of boats. So all of these elements point towards human trafficking. So I'm going to want to right click that and tag those artifacts as well. And returning to my digital strategy, you can see here that we set a date and time range, but I just want to lead your to this paragraph, obviously we start off with a targeted date and time. But as the text says, if information linked to these circumstances leads us away from those dates, it will be followed to resolve the meaning. You need to record and justify that within your event log as you're going through. It just helps to prove why you are following that trail, and also helps when you revisit the case 6 months later. If you're lucky to give testimony, you can remember why you were led down that path. So a couple of other options I want to show you. We've got a nice 76 tagged artifacts. And one of the things that I had turned on for this case was speech to text and OCR. And it's going to add no evidence to this case, but I just wanted to show you what it does. So if you have a case in the future that involves a lot of audio messages, you know that you can redecode that file with speech to text turned on or OCR, for example. So here we go. We have an audio file with Romanian language. And of course, we could translate that. But if we play the audio file, and you can see that the transcribed text is here. So that has saved me, if I come across a case where they're communicating via audio messages, that is going to save me a lot of time. It's already been transcribed. It saves me listening to them all, and it makes it keyword searchable. So it's a huge time saver. But let's go back to our group chat. And if we scroll back up, and let's pick one of these other chats. Boom. And you can see, like the OCR for this one, obviously a lot of cards, but the OCR text would come out here. So if we had a license plate or something along that nature, we could then keyword search that OCR text. Extremely intensive on your processing, but if your case justifies it, it's going to be a worthwhile investment of that processing time. So another thing that we could do when we're working our case is we could go to timeline, because remember our digital strategy just gave us a 2-week window, but we have our participants filter on, and you can see that the communication potentially goes back to 2023. And as we zoom in, we can see that they have been communicating more than just June and May. So this could lead you down that path of further investigation if needed. You could have enough to finish your case at this time. You could press the floppy disk and save, and that may come up at a later stage if a defense was proposed, for example. But it's a great way. And you can see next to it, we've also got a maps filter we can invoke. So these are 2 handy features that you can invoke straight from the top here. But one of the questions we got at the start is about exporting database files. So if we're investigating an app that wasn't passed by this device, so we look at the apps that are shown on the main case overview page, we've manually checked the device and we find an app that isn't present. Now, how do we have a look for apps that are not present? So one of the databases that we could look for is app state. So let's just bring up databases. And if you could hear the fan on my computer, you would feel sorry for it. So we'll go to app state and local app state. So again, remember I gave you this file path earlier, com.android.vending. So let's have a quick look at it. We're going to show it in a new tab. And you can see we've got our account, but we've also got the title of the app. We could have install date. So these are going to help you identify what apps are present on the device. It might be a BFU extraction, so you haven't been been able to get to the device to validate it. So we would, of course, have a look at some of these apps that are present. So we can go down, we can see Snapchat. Say, for example, we wanted to have a look at WhatsApp. Say WhatsApp had not been extracted from this device. How I would go is I would go to all artifacts. And I would go straight down to file tree. And the reason the question was asked, and forgive me if I've misinterpreted it, but the question was, can you export database with the associated write-ahead log and the shared memory files? Well, of course you can. And you want to do that because you need to investigate the database in my opinion, you need to see it in its two states, because a write-ahead log is used for a database to maintain integrity. So I always review a database without the write-ahead log and the shared memory and with. So that way I can see what changes have taken place. So if we go down to user data, and hopefully that answered your question, and I'll show you how to export the database files out with those write-ahead logs as we're going through. So user data, and it's this location that is going to contain the sandboxes for the different apps. You can obviously see that Android comes with its own associated. Glad I answered the question. So I can see that Android comes with its pre-built-in ones. And as we scroll down, you'll see, because this was a Samsung device, we're going to then have Samsung. You can see Facebook at the top there. You can see Fire Chat. And you can see, and I'll just quickly show you here, if we open up the database folder, you can see here I've got a journal. So a journal is another type of write-ahead log, but let me find a write-ahead log just so I can show what the question wanted to be answered. And I have to be very quick now. Right, so as we scroll down, so there's the com.dot Samsung that I told you about. Scroll through, and again, all of these sort of locations, all of these file locations are going to have hidden gems such as like the system wallpaper and all of those sort of artifacts that are going to help you build provenance. It could have a picture of the subject with their family, for example. But as we go down, you can see here as we get to the bottom, and typically I went back up, here are some of the apps that I would be interested in. I'd want to know why they're running the wasted app. I'd research these apps. If you just do a right-click copy, you're going to be able to search from here, right-click copy. Have a look on the Play Store, see what that is. Possible to search for a table name. It isn't possible to search for a table name, but like I said in part one, if you turn on text search within SQL, you are going to be able to search within those database files. So if we go down to where were we talking? We were going to be looking at WhatsApp. So we open WhatsApp, and WhatsApp clearly has got a ton of databases. And for those of you who've worked with it will know that we're looking at message store. And here we can see the shared memory, and you can see the shared memory's got some data written to it. And the write-ahead log has got 512. So it's got a fair bit of data that's going to append to the main database. And that how you would do that is, how I would do it is go to the root of the folder, right click, export all files. And that would then export the shared memory and the write-ahead log. And then, like I explained earlier, I would then create a copy of the main DB and I'd place that in its own folder, and then I'd investigate them both. And of course, once you open a database within XAMN, so if I looked at the message store, and I can come up to these three dots and I can show in a new tab, but I can also launch in an app of my choice. And here's one I made earlier for the local appstate.db. This was the one about installed applications. So this is my table, and I can see that I've got blob data here potentially. I've got lots of dates and times. I've got titles of apps, but there's a lot of noise in this database. But at least bringing it into an open source tool such as DB Browser, it allows me to redefine it. And this tool is free, so that's even better. But we can see the package name. So there's going to be certain fields that we want to bring back. There's certain columns that we want. So if I go along to my execute SQL, and again, you don't have to be a SQL genius, but there is a great SQL book out there written by Paul Sanderson, which I'd highly recommend. But if you're not a SQL genius, ChatGPT, for example, will show you how to write a SQL-like query if you tell it, I want to bring back these columns from that table. So you can see here, I've selected the package name along with the account, and then I've converted the timestamp as install date. So this allows me to go through, and I've ordered by the first download. So as I go to the bottom, these are the most recent ones. This would then allow me to search for, I don't remember seeing XAMN or my other tool past this app. It puts me on the right place to go and search for them. And I've just had a look at the time. And XAMN and any other analytical tool, you could spend days upon days going through all of the available options. This was a quick insight into how you deal with those apps. And you could, of course, run Python scripts. XAMN allows you that capability. There are some great Python scripts within the customer forum on MSAB. For example, there was one written in there yesterday, I believe, that allows to run OCR on upside down pictures. So if you've got license plates that are upside down, this free script that you can get from the forum would then allow you to deal with those artifacts. And again, this was a community member who has shared that. So take time to go in there, appreciate and thank the people who do it, and start sharing your own as well. We all benefit from this. But the reason you're all here, you wanted to find out how to win. Let me turn my camera on. How to win the coveted MSAB challenge coin. And this coin has gone down really well at industry conferences. But over here, if you scan the QR code, that is going to take you to a file location where you're going to need to enter the password as shown on screen. That is going to allow you to download, and I will show you what you're going to, it's going to allow you to download these. So in here, you're going to have a subset of data. You're also going to have examnviewer.exe in case you're not an XAMN user at present. And that's going to allow you to have a look at that case. However, the password, the XAMN file or the XRY file is locked. So in order to open that portable case, you're going to have to return for part 3 to get the password to unlock that file. And then what will happen in part 3 as a handout, you will get some questions that you can then go away with that file, carry out some of the methodology that you've seen today, and the first person to return the correct answers in the quickest time will be the winner of the challenge coin, which we'll send out to them. So hopefully you've all got the file location and the password. So part 3 happening 2 weeks today, July 10th, going to be same time. And again, just scan the QR code to automatically go to the landing page for that. And just while we're there, I'm just going to go through the Q&A. No, you've been kind to me and you've kept it all in the chat, so it's a lot easier for me. Hopefully everyone has now signed up for part 3. And of course, if you've got any questions that you haven't wanted to ask in the chat today, please feel free to reach out to me on adam.furman@msab.com or connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd be more than happy to answer them. But thank you very much for all of your attention, and I look forward to seeing you all in 2 weeks' time. Thank you.